Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Players Championship. You're gonna head up there in person, be there Wednesday through Sunday, so I'm gonna have that boots on the ground insight for you guys. But here in this video, gonna break down how to approach your research and process this week, both from the betting side and for your DFS lineups, to go out there and hopefully make this fifth major championship, as some will call it, one to remember here in 2025. So first off, we'll start it off with a look at our key stats and modeling for this golf course. Essentially what I'm looking for in my plays this week to go out there and find some of the best plays. Then afterwards, we're going to turn our attention to our exposure, both from the DFS and the betting angle, to give you a few examples of players that I'll be well over the field on, and of course, the reasons why for as well. So by the end, you'll be an expert on what to expect for this week, so let's not waste any time at all and start off with, first off, look at that modeling and some of the key stats around TPC Sawgrass. I would say that TPC Sawgrass is a complete test of golf. It's not one where you can really overpower it in any one category, and you've seen a wide variety of winners over the years. Guys that are putting specialists, some of the best iron players out there on tour, kind of like with Scotty the last few years, some off the tee specialists like a Rory McIlroy that have gotten the job done, and then of course some young up-and-comers like a Siwoo Kim, who pretty much came out of nowhere to go out there and snatch the thing. It makes for a very dramatic week, one that is compelling because so many people are going to be in the mix, and because of all the water in play, also the birdies that are in play and some of the easier par fives, you get a lot of that leaderboard volatility. So in terms of what we're looking for in players, it's going to be a good mix of a different, wide range of categories, but I guess a few things that we're really going to hone in on. So in terms of number one, we've got shots gained approach there, and usually it's always up there at the top, but this golf course is truly a second shot golf course. It's one where if you're really precise with the irons, you can separate yourself from the field because you only have 5,500 square foot greens, and if they could help it, sometimes weather permitting, they can't make the greens very firm, but if they are firm, they play even smaller than that 5,500 square foot. So you're going to see a premium out there on that second shot all week, and it's a wide variety of shots. It's not one where you have all long irons, or not all wedge shots or anything like that. You're going to have to be good pretty much across every different proximity bucket. And then the other thing you really want to hone in on this week would be your driving accuracy. And a lot of that comes down to the water being in play on 17 of your 18 holes. So whether it's being precise off the tee or precise into these greens, that is going to be rewarded a whole bunch. In fact, if you take a look at some of your past champions at this golf course, a lot of times they're not even gaining a whole bunch with the flat stick. You've had winners go out there to be neutral, even losers out there on the greens, and get the job done around this sort of track. So that shows you just how much emphasis we have on those other categories, and in particular the two ball striking categories. I'm looking at some Pete Dye designs, success around these risk reward sort of golf courses. Around the green at a tricky track like this really comes into play when the wind kicks up, which as of right now looks like Saturday, Sunday could be a little bit windy. So if so, you might have to earn it over there on Saturday, Sunday. You do have overseeded greens there. You can't completely ignore the putting aspect, but as I mentioned before, a little bit de-emphasized, I'd say, around this sort of track. Par 5 scoring is where a lot of your birdies are going to be generated. Bogey avoidance, especially if the conditions get a little bit windier. And then for our comp courses, I've got PGA National with a lot of water in play, also a second shot golf course. Harbortown Golf Links, a more positional golf course. A lot of the same guys that pop up there, you've seen pop up at the Players. And then TPC River Highlands, which is different from the agronomy perspective, but the same sort of layup golf course, precision off the tee, really being rewarded that you're looking at these different tracks. So if you couldn't tell, right, some of the shorter, more accurate players in the field are going to be in play at this sort of track. And it's not like we're only looking for some of the shorter guys. It's just that they maybe have a better chance around a Players Championship than they do at some of those other venues. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take these key stats in our modeling and turn it into some of our exposure this week. Our first core play is going to be Collin Morikawa, who frankly isn't one of my favorite players that we have on tour. So if I'm getting to him for an outright, there's usually a good reason for it. And it's because I think he's building towards a win. His form has been fantastic over the last few months. And, whether it's the last 24 measured rounds that we look at or the last 12 measured rounds, zooming in a little bit, one of the best players when it comes to shots gained ball striking. So over his last 24, you can see gaining close to half a stroke per round off the tee, a little bit over 0.75 strokes per round out there with the approach play. and you zoom in and it's a whole lot of the same there towards the top, gaining about 0.4 strokes off the tee, a little bit over 0.6 per round out there with the approach play, and the issue the last few times out has been that flat stick. But this is a golf course, as previously mentioned, where you don't have to be an elite tier putter to go out there and get the job done. So even if he doesn't win for us, go out there, cash a plus 1400 outright. I love the odds over there for the top 5 at plus 325, as well as him over there in the DFS format. He's the sort of player that has the accuracy to take on this sort of track. We know the second shot really plays into his skill set as well. And it's kind of surprising when we take a look at the course history here that it hasn't gotten better for Collin. In fact, his best start over the last 4 years has been that T13 finish. Did make the cut in 3 of the 4 years, which is better than some of the other players you can say towards the top end of the board. But at the same time, I would have expected some top 5s, contention out there for Collin Morikawa, not him making cuts and finishing in 40th. So that's maybe the one data point that we have against Collin. But last week out from tee to green was an absolute monster, especially out there off the tee on approach. Was one of the best players out there in both categories, and that was in a signature field event, right? Nothing to scoff at, being top 5, top 10 out there and approaching off the tee. And at plus 1400, it's the same, if not a little bit of a better number that what you can get at most other sports books. Of course, down here in Florida, I only have access to Hard Rock Bet, so it kind of limits the kind of exposure that I can get to. But with somebody that's coming in with good form, fits the exact kind of skill set of a player that I'm looking for this week. Go back to the key stats, right? Looking for a good iron player, precision player off the tee, somebody that can be decent around the green, right? He's gotten a lot better at that over the last year or so. Good par 5 scorer, and he doesn't have a ton of comp course history at these different tracks. Most notably, really only the bottom 2 courses over the last few years or so, but he's got some top 5s, top 10s at those positional signature tracks. So, he's got enough going this week for me to go out there and play him at $10,500. And I do think that he'll get some ownership, especially after being in contention. Probably should have won over there at the Arnold Palmer. It's not like I think he's going to be low owned at this portion of the leaderboard. It's just that I don't think anyone's going to be overly chalky. You're going to get a bunch of people that play your Scotties, your Rorys towards the top, despite them being really expensive there in that 11, 12K range, because we have a $5,000 range this week, right? I'll remind you, if you haven't already taken a look at the pricing, that the pricing goes the whole way down to $5,000, and there are some legit players down towards the bottom end of the board. Guys that are in form, like a Joel Damon, that are only $5,100, and, it's also the 6K range here that is absolutely stacked that would normally be players there in that 7K range. So you're going to have all the salary you need to go up there and spend for those top tier players, which is why I think a Collin Morikawa might be like 20, maybe 25% owned at the very much. And 25% would probably be towards the top end of that spectrum where I would project them out. Still a long time to go till Wednesday until we know for sure, but I'll get over the field on that sort of player. So just the kind of skill set that I'm looking for around a TPC Sawgrass. And as previously mentioned, not my favorite player out there around Tour. He's just seems a little bland to me, right? I'm looking for a little bit more personality out there in a lot of my top players, but undoubtedly, I think a really good click at this sort of event. Next up, we got Tommy Fleetwood at $9,800. That plus 3,300 outright seems like a little bit of a donation considering his track record when it comes to winning, but I really like the top 5 at plus 600. I got a lot more of my exposure on the betting side over there to that bet between the two, and at DFS at $9,800, he doesn't have to even come close to winning to be an optimal play. Or if he cashes that top 5, he's likely going to be really close out there to that optimal lineup, and you could argue that Tommy Fleetwood is hitting the ball best on approach of anyone out there in the field. Now, there'd be a couple guys towards the top you could say that about. Number 1 would be a Justin Thomas, which, by the way, I've got to say he's on my short list of guys that I want to bet this week. In fact, I haven't bet him outright at this point. That's why he didn't make the core plays list, but at plus 2,000, if I could get that on Hard Rock Bet, I might have to pull the trigger there, mostly because of all this approach play that you see. But look at Tommy Fleetwood, right? Doing his thing as well, gaining over a stroke per round when it comes to the approach play. And what actually favors Tommy Fleetwood in between him and a Justin Thomas there would of course be the driving accuracy. JT can tend to spray it a little bit off the tee. Does have his weeks we can go out there and keep the ball in play, and that is typically when Justin Thomas goes out there and contends, like when he won at this event 4 or 5 years ago. Tommy Fleetwood, though, this is the sort of golf course that he should go out there and kill, and kind of like a Collin Morikawa, he hasn't done that to this point. In fact, if you take a look at the last 5 years, his best start was 5 years ago over there with the T5, which he'd be totally satisfied with if he went out there and got it done done this week. Fourth place on his own would be better out there for that top 5 bet that we did. But look at this, right? T35, T27, T22, a missed cut far below our expectations. I would have expected some top 10s and, maybe another top 5 over those last 5 years. So the kind of player that I would expect to long-term start to get better around a TPC Sawgrass, because just like a Collin Morikawa, he has the perfect kind of skill set, right? Second shot player, a player that can really keep the ball and play off the tee. You're talking about 2 of the top 10, 2 of the top 20 driving accuracy players pretty much every single year out there, the PGA Tour, and the form has been on fire. He's number 3 in the field when it comes to that recent form ranking, and at $9,800, I do think he'll get some ownership just like a Collin Morikawa, but you don't have to get different with your top-end players. In fact, there are only really a few guys up here towards the top end of the board that I would qualify as potential leverage plays. Like, one might be a Xander because of the rust issue. I think, some people may decide to stay away right there. Down here in this 9K range, like, you've got guys that might be a little bit lower owned than some of the guys around them, like, kind of Matt McNeely, Jordan Spieth kind of stand out, right? They might be a little bit lower owned than their peers, but you're still talking 7 to maybe 10% ownership on those sort of players. No one up top is a true pivot out there in your lineup. So, if you have somebody like a Morikawa Fleetwood, who I'm pretty comfortable on a Monday saying that I think both will be chalk out there for this week, I'm okay knowing that because I have guys down there towards the bottom end of the board that are more than going to offset that sort of ownership. And, if you're playing both together, you're really going to have to work to do that with your last 4 spots. But if you're playing one of the two, maybe taking somebody that's a hair lower owned instead as your second man in, right? Maybe your first man in if it's Tommy Fleetwood, right, that you're using down there in that 9K range, then you're going to be totally fine out there with the rest of your lineup. So just to say that it's not who you play out there in your lineups, right? It's how you play them out there in the contest that you're entering. Before we go through our last core play here, last outright for the week, as well as 3 value plays afterwards that I went out there and took for top 20s, which by the way, could be really good ways to leverage against the field, also save some salary. Do want to remind you guys how you can find access to all of these sheets for yourself. And that of course would be over there on my Patreon page, which you can find in the description of this video. There's a link to it on there. And on there, you can download these sheets completely uncensored. So of course, all this stuff that is blacked out over there is going to be accessed over there by my Patreon members for every single player that's teeing it up. So you've got my modeling, both in terms of course ranking, recent form. You've got all the shots gained metrics, recent form, actual finishes, also course history that you can reference for every single player in the field, all over there on the Patreon. So, I don't like to spend a whole bunch of time going out there and talking about it because, we're here for the content, right? Give you guys the strategy out there for any given week. But if you guys want truly my take on every single player out there in the field, right? Not just the 5 or 6 that we talk up here in these videos, then that's the place to do it, because there are some outright bits, there are some top 5, top 10s I've already entered, right? That I can't include out here on this piece of content. Just not enough time in the day to go through every single piece of exposure that I'm getting to, especially like with my 150 max pool out there for DFS. But for all of that, that can be accessed over there with the Patreon. So it's meant to be, a supplementary piece of content out there to what you guys see here to give you just a little bit more of a deep dive out there into my process. So that includes, of course, the custom model weightings that you guys saw over there on the right before, as well as all that data that you see throughout my videos. But our last core play that we're going to get to through this week, before we talk about some values a little bit further down the board, it's going to be Sepp Straka here at $8,600. So Sepp Straka took for an outright at plus 5,500. Also for a top 10 over there at plus 450. Kind of like the bet there with Fleetwood. I'm a little bit heavier on that top 10 bet than I would be for that outright splash. But Sepp Straka is playing some of the best golf of his career. Of course, we took advantage at the Amex with the outright at that course. A little bit of a step up in talent level, right, between the Amex and what we have here with the 5th major, some would call it. But Sepp Straka might just be a better player at this point. If you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, he's gaining in 3 of the 4 stat categories, but most pronounced over there on approach, which is exactly what we're looking for at a second shot golf course. You zoom out to the last 24 rounds, and it's not a fluke. He's still gaining over 0.6 strokes per round when it comes to the approach play, and he's gaining across all 4 stat categories. In fact, even more significantly off the tee, also over there with the putter, and he's one of the most accurate players that we we had on tour the last few years. That's really where he stepped up his game. He's not only always been a really good iron player, but he's incorporated to be one of the most precise drivers that we have on all the PGA Tour, which of course is extremely helpful at a golf course that has water and play on 17 of the 18 holes. And he's also a player that's won at some of our comp courses, PGA National, right? He's had a ton of success around there. He's been in contention multiple times for top 5, top 10s. Hell, even in contention to win at courses like Harbor Town or even TPC River Highlands. So you're talking about a player that fits this style of golf course to a T, is playing some of the best golf of his entire career, and on this overseed, he gains 0.75 strokes per round. So in terms of a course fit, I can't think of a better example of a player that's value than a Sepp Straka out here. The ownership's really going to be the X factor for me. I'm hoping that the ownership's going to stay a lot lower than where it should be, because compared to the players around him, he should be like 25-30% owned. He is the best player by far that you have here in the 8K range. Because there's enough guys here, I think there's a chance he comes in like 15 to 20% owned. And if he's going to be in that 15 to 20% range, and I will be glad to go out there and jam him into lineups, because I think he should be there in that 9K range. Like if you told me that Daniel Berger was down here at 8,600, and then you had Straka at $9,600, I wouldn't bat an eye at it whatsoever. Now Berger, I think a fantastic play this week, also very accurate, also playing really well out there from tee to green, but Straka is the better player over the last 6 or so months. So I think that he's just amazing value when it comes to the salary this week, and it really helps you spend up for an extra 9K player, because you're saving that whole $1,000 from where he should probably be priced. So if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, right, they look impressive as we mentioned, but the event history has also been pretty decent. Now it's not quite where we want it out there for some of our plays, but T16 last year was pretty solid. Also had that T9 finish out there 3 years ago, so some better course history than what you had with Morikawa and Fleetwood, but no wins, right? No top 5s quite yet, which is kind of surprising given the course fit and how well I think he gels with this golf course. So maybe with the kind of form that we've seen here in 2025, again, arguably the best golf that he's ever shown us, it's his chance to go out there and crack that top 5 seal. So, the top 10 bet felt a pretty safe there at plus 450, and part of the reason I went with the top 10 bet as opposed to a top 5 bet is that the odds for the top 5 were a little bit worse than what you have at some of those other sports books. Next up, we got ourselves Keegan Bradley, and this will be the start of our value plays down towards the bottom. So this will give you an idea of a guy you could use to try and save some salary, right? Try and open up a little bit more towards the top end of the board, and they're all going to be top 20 bets. So the first one we got here is Keegan Bradley, who, if you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, has been hitting his irons beautifully. In fact, close to a stroke per round out there with his irons. He's gaining in 3 of the 4 categories, the only category into the negative, of course, being that putter. And he's not the best putter on this overseed, but he's had a few of his spike performances here as well. So, the Valspar kind of stands out. He always has decent putting years over there at the Valspar. And if you take a look at his event history, though it is extremely variant, extremely chaotic, a few missed cuts in there, he had a 5th place there 3 years ago, had the T16 back there 5 years ago, and he has a lot of experience around TPC Sawgrass, a lot of scar tissue with some of those missed cuts, but he's also shown us some of that top end upside. And because he's had that resurgence over the last 3 or 4 months, starting to gain on approach, starting to get those top 20s like we're used to seeing for Keegan Bradley, those 2 missed cuts the last few years, I think they're going to keep people off of him in DFS, right? Might make him close to the average ownership out there for this range. And I think that's a mistake, right? He's playing by far better golf than what you had for those last few years. And long term, he's got some good starts out here around a Players Championship. So $7,700, I don't think he'll be the guy that everyone's clicking on in this range. I could see people playing McCarthy, Brian Harman as well. Not to say that I think either are terrible plays, right? Especially Brian Harman. I think he's for sure in play around this style of golf course. But Keegan Bradley has that top 5, top 10 upside that we're looking for in a DFS. I think you're looking at about maybe 7-8% ownership, maybe 10% if he starts to get steamed towards the end of the week. But you throw him in 20-25% of your lineups, and you're going to have that leverage that you're looking for towards the field. So, that recent form, obviously that Sunday at API was crazy. I got to see toward the end of that round, just incredible what he was doing there around Bay Hill. So he had the T5 last week, T34 that was over there at the Genesis, another one of these signature events. This isn't a signature event, but it is maybe the strongest field that we get on all the regular PGA Tour this year. He's shown us the firepower to go out there and crack that top 20. So a player that I'm investing investing in out there this week in both markets out there from DFS and for the betting side. Next up, we got Aaron Rai here at $7,100. And what I like for Aaron Rai is a top 20 at plus 300, which, by the way, the Hard Rock number is one of the best top 20s that you can find on the industry out there for Aaron Rai. But another one of these precision players off the tee, more accurate than he is long off the tee, has been really hitting his irons well. So if we go to the last 12 measured rounds, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Gaining off the tee close to a third of a stroke per round. With his lack of length, that's telling you how many fairways that he's hitting. But he's also gaining over a stroke per round out there with his irons. And, you know, the kind of player that isn't going to wow you out there with his short game. But as we mentioned during the custom modeling section, right, if there's one category that is kind of de-emphasized here, it's your putting, right? I've got putting lower than around the green, which is a very rare thing over there in my modeling. Normally around the green towards the bottom because it doesn't correlate the most out there to scoring, but because of how difficult it is around the green and how, you know, little the putting matters around a TPC Sawgrass is why guys like an Aaron Rai could go out there top 5. Hell, he might even win this sort of event someday, but out there for this sort of week or out here in DFS, right, I'm not going to be that bullish out there on his chances, right? The top 20 at plus 300 felt a little bit more appropriate for a player of his caliber, but you're talking about somebody in DFS who towards the bottom end of the 7K range is 5, maybe to 7% owned at the very most. So if you throw him in 15, maybe 20% of your lineups, that could be close to 3x leverage right there. If not, if you play him a little bit more aggressively in 25 to 30% of your lineups, right? Maybe you're not entering a whole bunch of lineups, you want to get a little bit more aggressive about it, you could take a massive stance against the rest of the field. Number 11, when it comes to that recent form ranking, the sort of player that hits a bunch of fairways like you'd hope for around a golf course like this, and the recent form, it doesn't wow you when it comes to a lot of these finishes, but they've been solid, right? T11 at API, right? T4, T37, kind of going under the radar a bit when it comes to these finishes. I mean, at API, he was hardly even on the broadcast the entire week, right? He goes out there and finishes top 20 out there in a signature event. I don't see him being chalk on this sort of slate. Now, if he starts to get some late steam, right, maybe it makes him a slightly worse play in DFS. I'll still be using him, full transparency, out there in my DFS lineups, but maybe not as much leverage to go out there to be had. But this top 20 market, other markets like props, that sort of thing, like underdog and prize picks later in the week, he is somebody that I'm going to be eyeing up quite a bit just because of how well he gels with this golf course, how well he's been playing over the last few events, is the kind of player that I'm actively looking to target. And then our last play here is going to be Doug Ghim at $5,600, who, if you know anything about his track record around this golf course, you know that is way too cheap for the kind of upside that he brings. And I took him for a top 20 at plus 375, which is much lower at other books. In fact, he's closer to plus 300 for the top 20 and a lot of those other competitors. So try and nab that value if you can now, if you have that sort of line available on Hard Rock. But what I like about Doug Ghim is that he's accurate off the tee, right? Not the longest player, right? You play him at these more positional courses, but the iron play has been electric over the last 12 measured rounds. In fact, gaining close to 1.5 shots gained approach per round is by far the best number that you have here in the 6K range, or 5K range rather, on a week like this. It's way down there when it comes to the pricing, but he's one of the best players, period, when it comes to shots gained ball striking. A player who's been hitting a bunch of fairways, not the longest, right? That's the only way he can go out there and gain a bunch of strokes to the field, right? Is if he's keeping the ball in play, and also somebody that's been absolutely striping it out there with the approach play. So if you take a look at the event history, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about when it comes to the track record here. Now, he hasn't won or anything like that, but a T16 last year for a 5K range player is more than going to pay off. Did miss the cut 2 years ago, but had that T6 finish 3 years ago, more than paying off his salary that time around. And hell, even this T29 finish, kind of like this T16 finish, you would be far from upset with that with this kind of price tag. So you're talking about somebody who's in form, right? The putter has been a huge negative out there lately, but what you've seen on the surface is that he's a little bit less shitty out there on this overseed. Now, he's still losing for his career over there on this type of grass, but what you'll see is that it's 0.84 strokes better per round than his 24 round baseline, which, by the way, you may say, oh, that iron play is probably just the last few weeks. Not really, right? Still gaining in the 3T to green categories, still positive over there with the off the tee play as well. But look at this, right? Just about a stroke per round when it comes to the irons. So the putter has also still been an issue, right? Over those last 24 measured rounds, but maybe he can get us some regression back to the mean over there with the flat stick. And by regression, that might just be a neutral, right? He's not going to go out there and win this sort of event. I think that's a little bit far-fetched, but the top 20 at plus 375 is undoubtedly value compared to where we can get him elsewhere. And when it comes to the ownership, because this is such a large 5-6K range this week, I can't see anyone down here being over 5% owned. In fact, a Doug Ghim's probably more realistically going to be close to that 3 to 4% ownership mark, where you don't have to go and take him in 20% of your lineups to get that leverage. So, there'll be a bunch of guys down here that I'm scattershotting like a Doug Ghim that fit this golf course, hitting their irons well over their last 12, last 24 measured rounds, and I think have upside for that top 10 or top 20 finish here. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the betting and DFS preview this week. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also comment down below who you've got as the winner for this week for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page. To qualify, they have to be at least 30 to 1 on all the major books, but if you can get somebody that's a little bit more of a long shot to go out there and win, you will win a free month access to my Patreon projections. Of course, that's where my spreadsheets are posted with all the modeling, all the projections and exposure that you see throughout my videos, as well as all the underdog and prize pick stuff that I'm getting to out there for rounds 1 through 4. So if you want to join that, make sure to check it out down in the link in the description of the video. And of course, make sure to enter the giveaway with your outright for this week for a chance to earn that for free. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with all the exposure that you're getting to, whether it's your DFS lineups out there in some GPPs. I hope to see you guys go out there and have a takedown or two, or over there with any of your betting exposure. I hope it's a profitable week on that front as well. But for some of the boots on the ground insight, make sure to check out the Patreon for that. I'll also be tweeting out some of it over there on my Twitter/X, which is also Gsluke DFS, if you guys want to check that out over there. And of course, on our Wednesday live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be up there in Ponte Vedra Beach, but still doing the live stream as per usual out there after I see the golf course during the practice round. So bring any questions you've got over there towards the Wednesday live stream. We go through a weather report on there, also ownership before lock, any of your questions down there in the chat, and get ready to rock and roll for this 5th major. But it should be a fun one. Absolutely stoked out there for all of our exposure. Best of luck, and I'll see you guys a little bit later on this week.